Somebody's buying Bolo. Somebody's buying Bolo. I need your love today. I need you right away. Somebody's in this bed. Somebody feels like no one cares. Somebody's in this bed. Somebody feels like no one cares.
G'day guys, I hope you can hear me. Just let me know if you can hear me. I gotta check that. And also just do a quick sound check as well.
How's it going out there, guys?
I think you're super sensitive on my mic. That's fine. I'll just turn me down. Yeah, just keep.
So
yep.
we're back here today for another PowerShell 101 with Michael and myself, Christian. Been working remotely the past couple of times. Had a few technical difficulties, so back here.
Yeah, back in the I would say the classroom. Yeah, right. Back in the gaming lounge. Thanks guys for joining us. If you guys are watching, yeah, so today is just going to be 101. We're going to be picking up from where we left off. If you've been following me recently on the streams, I've been working with Azure 2.0 functions, and I've basically been working on in conjunction to this project. So we're going to be picking up off today, writing a recipient job as well as potentially a function, a commandlet. I believe with this today, I think that will be what our focus will be. I've still got some other bits and pieces to sort out within PowerShell. So, within the Azure functions, but yeah, I think that's about it for today. So yeah, how's TAFE going, dude? What's been happening?
Fun and games. I had another test we had to do, more assignments. Gotta love those assignments. They're great fun. The assignment was on, I'm sure I mentioned it last time, dynamic routing and the like.
Oh yeah.
That was RIP and EIGRP.
And EIGRP, yeah.
They haven't really touched OSPF yet, though that came up in the test, which was fun. So yeah, lots of fun and games.
Yeah. It's always fun networking. It's actually funny. Yesterday, just up the road at Brisbane Downs, I've actually they're putting NBN in.
Yep.
So you guys are watching at home. If you're overseas of Australia, NBN's our new national broadband network. It comprises of 3 key network elements. So it's copper. G'day, Ali. I can never pronounce your name. Adelio. G'day, mate. I know. We talk all the time. I just can never pronounce your name. So we got national broadband networks. So we have copper, which is basically VDSL for what we call fiber to the node. So they're basically just running to the similar street. I wouldn't say much to the street. It's a bit low. Okay, I'll turn us up.
How's that now?
How's
Better?
that? That's I'm pretty much in the yellow now, so yeah, that should be a bit better. So we have VDSL delivery, and then we have was it hybrid HFC, hybrid fiber coax, something hybrid fiber coax. And basically what they're doing is a similar process. They're just basically running coax fiber to a central distribution point somewhere locally in the neighborhood, and then distributing it with coax. And they're all right, but then you get the ones that are quite fortunate, which gets fiber to the premise, so they're just running full fiber optic. It's actually pretty good. So I have fiber to the premise. I'm one of the few people in Australia that actually has proper, what we call the original NBN, which was a fiber optic cable to the premise.
Originally, where I live, we were never slated to get the NBN. Go figure. We now have been given fiber to the node.
Yeah.
So our speed is pretty good. I think it's about 20 meg down.
Yeah.
But nothing on fiber to the premise.
Yeah, fiber to the premise is pretty much it's like what you get. You're going to obviously get a fiber optic cable into your garage. So there's one in mine, which goes in my comms cabinet. But basically, I deliver 100 megabit, 100 down, 40 up. But those NTDs, which is what is in my garage, is capable of pushing gigabit. But to be honest, NBN, obviously ISPs are not going to offer that. In terms of price wise, I actually pay 110 a month. I'm on a business plan, so I actually paid an extra $10 for a business plan, but I get unlimited data for 140. And for fiber to the premises, one of the biggest things is I get roughly during peak times I'll get 98 meg. And obviously with 40 megabit, I have huge streaming capacity, so I can stream 1080p multiple times. And obviously I can upgrade that plan if I really want and go 100 synchronous, but to be honest, I'm not really keen on it at the moment. The biggest thing I love about, to be honest, to the premise is the fact it's just low latencies. I can play games on the US quite well because obviously my ping to Sydney is about it's 8 milliseconds there, and then basically over to the US it's roughly about an extra. It's 200, so I can play Rocket League and things like that. It's not too bad. But then you basically, it's really I've seen some people. Yeah, with NBN, and they're just getting the worst stories. So it really comes down to like if you're lucky, you got the premise, and I was really lucky because I was sweating bullets. I did not want to get fiber to the node or anything like that because I'm a big believer of fiber optic to the premise.
And I agree.
It's 100. It just makes sense. Like you can push a lot more bandwidth through a piece of glass than what you can do through a piece of copper. So
the problem we had where I live is it's considered rural residential, so there's a fair bit of limitation on the infrastructure they have out there. We were lucky enough to get fiber to the node.
Yeah.
Originally, it was all shared pair up the street. We were one of the only people on a single
pair.
Yep.
Wow.
Single pair.
Yep.
And for us, we get an unlimited data package, and I think we got a phone line included in that, and we're on. I think the cost is about $99 a month.
Yeah.
So still pretty good. I now have an unlimited data package, which is great.
You can actually do things and not worry about your bandwidth.
Yeah.
We don't really have much competition in Canada. Still for 70, 300 down, 20. That's actually not bad. 300.
It still beats my speed.
Yeah.
So
Australia's we've got a lot of there's a lot of there's a lot of people that basically throw around how much speed you need in terms of what's really needed. And the biggest thing is that with the place up the road there, they're running 10 megabit and they're getting frequent dropouts with DSL. I'm just okay, we can't do anything to your internet right now. I'm not even going to spend, we're not going to spend a cent on anything until NBN comes in, and then we'll start looking at some decent networking infrastructure. So, but it's just really, I just can't believe for $70, because Canada's dollar's the same as Australia. It's right, they're roughly on parity. Yeah. I remember,
so that's actually far better
that's
than.
actually way better value than what we get in Australia. But then, let's be honest, in Australia you get ripped off for everything. So,
No political statements on this channel,
Yeah, no political statements on this channel,
but you
but
get ripped off for
you get ripped
everything.
off for everything. Whether it's like yeah. Anyway, let's change channel now and let's get stuck into some PowerShell. So obviously it's PowerShell 101. We're not here to whinge about the NBN or any sort of internet. So yeah, we get ripped off. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm not even going to get started because I'm going to get on a rant and I'm never going to stop ranting. So let's get started. So Christian's going to be driving.
Oh, wonderful.
He's to be cherry bluing, and because that's the only keyboard that you need is a cherry blue switch. And we're going to get started. So I'm just going to quickly change our scenes. Okay, yep, we can still see. Okay, so as you can see, I've actually changed my Visual Studio theme because I wanted to try something different. And Potato Aquili, I can't pronounce so. Yeah, it just drives. Yeah. Anyway.
They have some really funky names to the theme.
Yeah, so this is called Cold Snack, and I was actually following it off from another mic by PowerShell MVP, and I decided to give it a go, and I love it. I actually love the blue. I thought it was going to be brutal on my eyes, but it's not too bad. So anyway, so to take a quick step back to what we've done beforehand,
Yep.
so you can catch up. With regards to the HTTP functions, so this is actually going back into the traditional when I was talking about those functions where we can actually test within C#. It actually Azure Functions Preview 2 in PowerShell actually allows us to do that, which is really cool. So just to give you a bit of a demo, so what I can do is I'm just going to go to PowerShell Bot project. Ah, I'm already in there. Whoops. Hang on, let me just drag this up so I can actually see what I'm doing. Ooh.
Helps if you were tapped, not dire.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just kind of also need to watch that other chat because Restream's kind of breaking on me at the moment. Yeah, I'm gonna do a dir, and then I'm gonna do a quick PowerShell website bot project. dir, yeah, I'm gonna go to. That's what I went there. I did. No, oh, sorry. Sorry, I am literally failing today. Go functions, bot project. As you can see, I've got a lot of subdirectories. Okay, so if I just do a function, function start project. Oh no, I forgot. Just bear with me for a second. Sorry, I just need to read the configuration. I always get this wrong. I don't know why. It's function host start, and it's like 3 words. So this function, this is basically a .NET Core command. So you know you got like for example, the best way to describe it is looking at pings or things like that. It's equivalent to a .NET, just equivalent to that. So as you can see here, we've got, it's basically, the best way to know whether it's an Azure function is the really cool function like that. I actually really love that personally, but anyway. So within here, you can see that we've got 3 functions. Functions are basically denoted by subdirectories within some sample data within it. So within that, you have what we call a function.json file. This describes to the runtime exactly how what's going on there, how's it going to work. So in this instance, we're talking about the authorization level. We're just going to leave that as function. That just talks about what permissions it has. This is basically the type of function. So in this instance, we're using a HTTP trigger. What that basically means is we can actually call it using HTTP. There's other ones out there like service bus, things like that, which basically a service bus is like, think of it as a giant pipeline where you can stick objects onto it. And what you do is you put what we call a message on that bus. And you can basically have an Azure function hook onto that bus and what we call a receive connector, and it'll automatically rip jobs out that are actually destined for it. And those kinds of, they're really good for like when you're doing lots of complex functions and you need to hand to different little Azure functions and do different kinds of things. Obviously, this is saying what kind of direction it is. It's a type of request, and then we've got our methods. So in this instance, we're just doing a get. So remember, we've got the big 4. So we go get, post, patch, delete.
Yep.
So basically get, we're getting something from Google. Post, we're pushing something to Google.
Yep.
Patch, we're updating something on Google. Delete, we're deleting something on Google.
Yep.
So that's basically, I'm just going to call them the big four.
Giving Google as the example there.
Yeah,
Yep.
oh, Google website. So if you're logging
Okay.
onto Gmail or something like that. So if
Yeah.
you're logging on, that's a post. If you're updating your details, that's a patch. If you're obviously browsing to google.com, that's a get.
Yep.
And if you're deleting, for example, something, that's a delete.
Deleting an email.
Yeah, to an extent. Like it's a little bit like, yeah, it's basically that kind of approach and how they do HTTP. The science is not exact, but it's just obviously it's a good example. So let's keep going. So what we've got here is basically our host, then we've got our profile, which basically just executes every time it's cold start. Cold start basically means when the function is running, it starts up for the first time, it'll execute this.
Okay.
Then we have our requirements. So we just basically, these are our you remember, like, it's like your require statements. Patches like update, patches like update. Hi, Call Bob. G'day, mate. So, and then basically the run.ps1 file denotes the actual function code itself. So in this instance, we have in this instance, I've actually moved the PowerShell script which we had here, which was no, not that one.
It was under API endpoints, wasn't it?
It was. This one here.
Yep.
I basically moved that into HTTP start job. So you can see it's actually a little bit different. It uses the using names, parameter. And so what happens is using parameter is really used for. I'm trying to, like, because you don't know C#, do you?
No, not really. The only brush with that sort of coding I had was when you showed me initially, and comparing that to VB script.
Oh, okay. This is bad because I'm trying to. So using statements, basically, the best way to describe it is it denotes. You can reference what we call classes within .NET.
Yep.
So in this instance, PowerShell is a little bit more different because it can actually do other things. But in this instance, we're using the using namespace system.net. So what that means is that rather than, I'll just quickly open up a terminal. I'm actually going to run some core here, so this is all PowerShell core. So rather than going, like system.net, calling a method like so,
Yep.
it actually is bringing that entire namespace into memory. So I actually don't even need to do that. I can actually just call the method natively. So you can see that in this instance here. Yeah, it's indicate namespace is correct.
Sorry, I'm still new to this stuff.
I'm trying to explain it in a way that Christian can understand it. So in this instance, if we look at, for example, remember how, like, obviously we're creating our GUID.
Yep.
We've got our stuff. When we respond to something back, we've got this type called HTTP status code. That is actually used by system.net. But rather than having to go system.net.http status code, we can just go HTTP status code because the namespace is already brought in. So it's an easier way to do it. So in terms of we've actually got our parameters as well. We can actually pass some parameters. And then as you can see, I've just basically got the existing functions that we're pulling in there. So testing object properties, testing data tables, things like that. So excuse me, sorry. So as you can see, we've got our GUID. You know what? We should really. Oh, did we create it? Yeah, we did. Yeah, we're gonna do that. Oh no. No, we're not. We're not gonna do that today. I'll do it later. So obviously we're invoking our SQL query, which is not actually invoking anything. It's just basically it's commented out.
Yep.
And then we've got our status code. So the status basically denotes the response. So if you see HTTP status code OK, you know how you go to, like, you see on when you go to like google.com or something, actually google.com, you go to a page that doesn't exist and it goes error 404.
Yep.
Those are status codes. So 400s are bad. 300s are redirect. 200s are good. I don't. You guys can correct me here because I'm always trying to, like, I always keep forgetting all the different types of code. Yeah, 200's okay. 300's a redirect. 400's are bad. 500's a proxy. I think 500 is a proxy, and 300's, yeah, server error. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Cool. Yes. So basically, different status codes will correspond to this thing. So in this instance, the status code of OK will just be a 200.
Okay.
So it's just easy to write that. Well, actually, technically, it's better to write that than it is to think because it denotes. Like in this instance, you could write a 200 in hypothetically, but in this instance, it's better to actually say the type because it's easier for a person to read it. If they know the HTTP status code's okay, they're like, well, okay, I don't really technically need to know the code. I just need to know that it's okay.
300 your proxy.
Yeah, 300 proxy redirection. 200s here you want. Yep, 300s go over here. 400s you made a mistake. 500s we've made a mistake. Cool. Thanks, Core. I'm actually going to try and remember that now. Here's what you want. Go over here. You made a mistake. We've made a mistake.
That sums it up nicely.
And 600 is flip the table and go home. I wish. So obviously, yeah. So in what we can do there is in the response body, we're actually defining how we're handing it back. So in this instance, you can see here we've got a response body. We're defining a hash table.
Yep.
And then basically we're doing that whole success. I actually did one change. So rather than having
you mean aside from adding all the HTTP
status
code and
rather than handing a response back saying and the 401 is I'm a teapot because why not? 600 is and 700 it's uninstall and never touch a computer again. Oh man.
That comes down to the age-old the age-old solution of if you got a virus, just delete your System32 folder.
Oh my god, yeah. That's it. Yeah, just nuke.
That's the joke, people. Yeah. Don't actually try that.
The amount of people you can con into if I'm deleting the System32, they're like, yeah, okay. I'm just like, no, don't delete your System32. They're like, what, should I delete it? No, don't you delete your System32. But what? Just anyway, it's taking up space. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Anyway. So we've got our response. So one of the things I did was rather than marking the response, I've actually marked the response in a sub. With a success.
Yep.
Now the reason why I've done that is because it makes it easier for us to be able to troubleshoot any sort of issues on the client side. So what it means is that, whoop, nearly knocked my Milo over. By the way, Milo is a drink in Australia and it's fantastic. When you have when you send, for example, a HTTP response, and like let's say in that body, you basically get like, okay, you get something. If you have a property within there that says success, it's easier to know that it's a success.
Yeah.
Now, if it basically get a property back saying error, whether that's, and it will invoke REST method will produce a terminating error when there's a bad status code, but it helps you troubleshoot the issue better.
Okay.
So this is just from a readability point, and it's easier to test on a success property than it is to test on some other property.
Yep.
And that's a definite property that's going to be there. It's either going to be success or error. One of those two. It's the REST Wild West, so it doesn't really it's each to their own, but it's just something that I did. And you can see that if there's any sort of error that occurs, I'm actually sending the response body back of error, so we know that we can troubleshoot that. Anyway, enough said. That's PowerShell functions. So what we're going to do now, I found that when testing with status codes, it's easy to. Yes, 100%. So that's one of the things with invoke REST method is that invoke REST method basically when you're using that commandlet, it will produce a terminating error on any sort of 400s, 500s. Actually, I'm trying to remember. Does it do it on 400s? I think it does. No. I can't remember now, but. The biggest thing is that, yeah, exactly right. When it comes to when it actually comes to getting the status code, it's easier to do it in invoke web requests. Now, you can get the status code information out of invoke REST method. That's possible, but you basically have to. It's what you have to do there is inside your try catch statement, and within this catch statement, you have to kind of massage that data out. So it's a little bit more trickier. But that all aside, yeah. Anyway, so. Let's jump into the run. So this is just a nice little template here. So what we're going to do, and what we're going to do is now we're going to write a receive job. So remember how, we'll just go back to the whiteboard so everyone can kind of see our project. So basically, yep, I'm just making sure I'm on the right one. So what we've done here is we've got our API endpoint and we've got our local script that's capable of sending the script to our Azure function. Azure function is capable of receiving it and it's capable of storing that job within a database. We're going to write the side that basically is capable of getting the data out. So what we're going to do, and it's going to be very similar code to what we're inserting in. It's going to pretty much be the complete opposite. And what we're going to do there is basically we're going to have a local script like we did before, and we're going to have our Azure function. So they're going to basically talk to two different API endpoints. And basically what that's going to happen is the script's going to go, hey, I want to do a get, and my get's blah. Now, hypothetically, we can actually do that in the same Azure function, but for this instance, I'm just going to keep them separate because it's just going to be a little easier. So
for you, so for me, not for you.
Yeah, exactly. So in this instance, it might, in some instances, it's actually better to contain it. But in this instance, I'm just going to keep them separate. So what I'm going to do here is we've got our Azure function. So what we're going to do is we're just going to keep all this existing code. I'm not going to even, that's me trying to troubleshoot items. So what I'm going to do quickly, just to get you set up, and then you can start running. I'm just going to get the response. Okay, so request.body, request is the parameter that gets passed in.
Yep.
That's basically a object that contains sub-objects of query strings, things like that. So we're going to be using that to get our body. No, we're going to use a query string. We're going to use a query string. I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to do that later, but we're going to use a query string. So what we're going to do is we're going to go request query. And I'm just going to go. I don't think that's correct, so I don't. I can actually grab it. To be honest, where was that file? Because that'll tell me what the property is. HTTP trigger. Sorry, I'm just going to quickly. I need to have a look at my ctemp object.txt file. Okay, yeah. So it's query.name. Okay, so each of the queries. Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do, and then we're going to test. All right. Okay, so I'm going to get you to drive now. What we're going to need to do is I want you to pseudocode out just in some comments there. I mean, you guys can help out as well.
I won't have much of an idea, so any help you can give, greatly appreciated.
So what we're going to do is we're just going to pseudocode out. You know what pseudocode is?
No.
Okay, pseudocode is basically you just kind of it's actually it's basically a it's like writing code, but you're actually not writing code. You're building the logic and the logic flow out, but you're not actually doing any sort of code at that exact point in time. So you're kind of going, okay, I need to go and hit this invoke web request to hit this endpoint. I need to do this. I need to do this. So in this instance, what we'd probably like to give you a bit of an example. So we are from this input, we're going to need to put a it's going to be a HTTP GET request because we're going to be getting content. So what we're going to need to do is the computer name that we want to get content. We also, okay, do we need a computer name? We're just going to need a GUID. That's all we're going to need. We're going to need a GUID. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm thinking about right now is what data do I need to get back from, what data do I need to provide for the Azure function to be able to search on what it needs. So remember how we wrote back in, I'll just quickly go back here. In here we've done our big giant SQL, our SQL insert into statement. So within here, what we need to do is we're basically, remember how we the return was the GUID, and remember how it returned the GUID? Where was it? Here. So that the GUID is what we're going to be doing our search on.
Yep.
So the GUID is really the only value we need to look up a job. If you have the GUID, you can get the result. We're excluding authentication here, guys. We're just for this, for the sake of this demo. So now that defines our input. So now we already have our input. So what we can probably do there is I'll get you just to bash out what you think the input should look like. So to give you a bit of an example, I'll just quickly steal the keyboard. So this is obviously, you see things like this, okay? No. And then you see something like, you've seen that? You ever seen that in your browser?
Not really that, no.
Okay, so when you basically are running any sort of server functions and things like that, what this basically does, everyone generally sees google.com. What you're doing here is we're encoding we're encoding the key values into the GET request. What that basically means is that this is a property or a key, and that is the value of that. Does that make sense? So remember how when we defined in as a hash table, we had where's a hash table? Here's a hash table. Key
Value. Yep. So
Key,
essentially that's
value. Yep. Yeah. And if you want to have multiple, you concatenate by doing that, and then you can go new val equals like so.
okay.
Yeah.
So in this case,
What do you think we should have?
I don't know about the start of the URL.
Well, I forget about the start of the URL because we like I don't even know what the URL is at the moment. So
Okay.
yeah.
So
all we're interested in is the query string syntax. Oh, sorry, the
key value.
Yeah, the key values within the query.
Okay.
And like if you don't need to know the exact GUID, you can just bash something out. Like
well,
yeah,
would
so
it,
we're just pseudocoding. Yeah, that's fine. That's exactly right. So if I'm going to do that, that would be my kind of thing. We can use Google as an example. So if we like go www.google.com and then we can go GUID equals meh. That will work. That would be perfect. That actually worked really well because we can now test on that. So the first thing now is we've defined that. What do you think we should do with that? Like how do we like what should be the first thing we do now since we've defined that schema as per se?
Well, you need to verify that the received GUID is the GUID you're looking for.
Exactly right. We need to validate that actually exists. And so when we're doing validation, I validate on the actual GUID as a property because it will come through as a property within Azure function. So we need to validate that request.query.GUID, I believe, the property GUID actually exists. So that's going to be our first thing we need to test because, but like, if we don't test that, then everything else is just completely irrelevant. Now you can take a shortcut, and like I said before, and we can do then this really comes down to flow. If you want to test a property, most people will just go object dot property like so. However, I'm not a big fan of it, and it really comes down to what we call this. Obviously, evaluates to be true. PowerShell naturally evaluates to be true. So
unless you use a switch.
I know if you explicitly say whether it's equal, true, or false. So if I say that basically means it's true, but if you want to flip it, you can use a not, or you can say equals true or equals false. In this instance, what I would do here is the reason why I don't do this anymore is because it comes down to Boolean values. because if I say let's say the property is equal to false, well, technically speaking, that will never evaluate to be true, even though the property exists, because it's evaluating on the property value, not the property name.
Yeah.
And that's really important because basically you're introducing a bug. So actually, the better way to do it is to do get member and then find out what it is. But because we like to be super efficient here, we're just going to copy and paste some functions. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to grab test property, like so, and I'm just going to paste that in there, like so. So we've got that in there. We can just keep sudoing out what we need to do. So I'll get you to write in there just to do a test property. And if you guys think I'm missing anything, add it in there as well. Like add it in the chat because that's always good. G'day Anthony, hope you stick around. The next thing will be is in this instance will be obviously we just need to add test the object property.
Yep.
So that's I'll get you to add that on 17.
So
Just add a comment. Oh, man,
right.
Yeah, just add a comment. I don't know. Like,
So I didn't know if you were meaning add a command or just
no.
add
We're
a comment.
sudoing this out. We're not going to be doing anything super special until we kind of work out our logic. So we're going to test the object property. What do you think we're going to do after that?
Testing it, verify it to be true. Do we pass it through to the next?
Well, this really comes down to, okay, so from a security perspective, the better thing to do right now would be, and this really comes down to the previous one, would be we're doing a direct insert into SQL. Now, that's like a big no-no. And the reason why it's a big no-no, because it's vulnerable to what we call SQL injection.
Yep.
SQL injection is pretty much where if you've got a SQL query, where you're actually inserting additional SQL into where it should be a normal text line, for example, but what you're doing is you're escaping that text, appending onto the query and attacking something on the end, and you can do malicious stuff with that. So, from a security perspective, I would actually do some escaping to kind of mitigate that issue there. In this instance, who cares? We're doing a project, and we're just not. I don't really care about security at the moment because
Well, it's just a demo.
this is just a demo. So, what would be the next thing we need to do? Because like realistically, I'm kind of like, well, like what do you think should be the next thing we need to do? Like we've got our GUID. What do we need to do with it now?
I don't know.
Okay, so remember, so it's in our database.
Yep.
So I was kind of thinking, well, we need to validate whether that GUID exists, but we don't actually need to validate whether it exists or not. We just need to go get it. And what I mean by that is if the GUID exists, we're going to get a response. We actually have data to return back to the user.
Yep.
But if it doesn't exist, we know that it doesn't exist. So does that make sense?
Yes.
So you're validating it based on the fact whether there's an actual response. So if the GUID was never inserted, like if there was nothing inserted into the database, you know it never happened. But if there was something inserted into the database, then there's going to be a tangible response because you actually have something to return from the database. So that would probably be what I'll do. I'll just be doing an SQL lookup.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll get you to add that in there.
As a comment?
Yeah, just add as a comment. That's fine. So from that, basically, you're looking at now we've got like do you see what I'm doing when I'm logically stepping through the process? So the next thing we've got our GUID. So let's say we've done our SQL query. What do you think we should do with that now? Like so this is where now let's say this is what I mean we've carried out SQL lookup to check if the GUID exists. So this is where we're going to do our first kind of pseudo if.
Yeah.
So let's say, what do you think? What do you think the outcome's going to be if the GUID doesn't exist?
If it doesn't exist, send back a response saying error.
Pretty much all. I'll actually send a 404. I'd actually send a 404 in a rest state because basically, technically it can't. it doesn't exist. So I don't know what the actual 404 equivalent is on that class. I'd actually have to go have a look at it, but I think there might be something in that HTTP with class response for 404. If not, we'll just send a 400 and then send an error tag saying it doesn't exist. What do you think the other option will be? What do you think else is going to come back?
If the GUID does return,
Hmm.
then you would have a 200, essentially. It does return.
Essentially, yeah, you would
Yeah.
have a 200. But now I want you to think about what kind of result it's going to return. So what are the two conditions with that response? So think about the initial response and how the process is like happening. So what I mean by that is, okay, so if we go back to here, we've got our initial send.
Yep.
That's basically done an insert into our database. It doesn't. There might not be any code. Then the execution happens.
Yep.
Sends back, updates the database with the response. So there's your two conditions right there. So what I mean by that is we have a condition that basically code's there, but it hasn't been executed yet. The second condition is the code has been executed. Here's the outcome. Does that make sense?
Run through it again.
Okay, so when you send the initial response, so that's our very first function that we wrote. That's going to be our initial. So we're basically saying, I want you to execute this PowerShell. So remember how it puts it in the database, and I'll put it in the database. I think it puts it in the database as no, that's just a function. So it puts it in the database as in progress.
Yep.
That's in progress. So it's basically, in essence, it's queued the job.
Okay.
Now, the other endpoint, so my service that we haven't written, basically hasn't. Oh, thanks, mate. So that process, there's two conditions that need to basically take place. So you've got in progress that's
Yep.
gone into the database, but then you also know that there's a potential to come back saying a response. So obviously what I mean by that is now we've got, because we have two conditions, they're both fine. One of them has a response. And so that's the key part there. So if it, for example, we're sending, let's say we do a lookup and the database returns in progress, we know that job's in progress and it should just return back saying, hey, I'm in progress. It actually shouldn't return back an output string. However, if it goes to the next condition, which is the job has come down to our remote worker and it's executed the job, and then it's actually sending back the PowerShell, that's a new status because that's that other function we haven't wrote yet, but that will update, for example, the status to be complete. So that's a completely new status which we can cater for.
Okay.
So that's the reason why I'm like, we can actually cater for those two responses. So the first one, it might return an object of success, and the properties might just be in progress. Status equals in progress, and here's the GUID just for you, for having the GUID. Just that's generally a good thing. But the next one could be when the jobs come back complete, we actually want to see the formatted JSON output. So that's a completely different type of response. So we actually might send back a status code, or like we might send back the same success thing with the GUID, and the status is complete. But there will be an additional property there called output, and that output is basically will be added onto the existing object, and that because you wouldn't want to just have that existing that property there unless there's an explicit reason for it there. Like there's no point just tacking an empty object onto something. It's just not needed. So in that instance, when the commandlet, which is the local commandlet, which is calling this PowerShell function, once it gets that response back, it can then dictate whether it's a legitimate response, or it's if legitimate response, whether it's a it's in progress. If it's in progress, it goes, okay, I'm in progress. But then if it comes back and it says, oh, here's my output, then we can actually reformat and reserialize the output that comes back from the server or from our remote worker. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want you to now, we're going to now write that logic. I'm going to get you to write it. So we basically got, in this instance, we've got our GUID.
Yep.
Well, we've got our GUID. We've got our actual, in essence, we're doing a lookup on a GUID, but realistically, we're going to get the entire row. So what I mean by that is, remember how if we went to our whiteboard here,
Yep.
Where did I actually put the table structure? This is what happens when you, okay, I lost the table structure. I'm going to have to go find it. Actually, I'll get you to open SSMS, so just type SSMS. Then I'll just drag it on the screen. We can actually look at the table structure because I built the table structure. If I can remember the admin password, I think I got it in KeyPass somewhere, so I'm gonna have to go for a hunt. But I'm hoping I had it saved because mates don't let mates save passwords. I saved it. I actually had a mate, one of my really good mates. He's like, Michael. I'm like, hey mate, can I use your computer? And he's like, yeah, sure. And I was like, oh, okay. Straight onto his router, changed his guest Wi-Fi. Like, he had like 4 of them. I changed all 4 to like, Luke loves One Direction. And I'm like, hey, Luke, yeah, have a look at your Wi-Fi. And he's just like, oh. I'm like, mates don't let mates save passwords.
Never save your passwords. Or if you do, secure them with another password.
Or even better, don't let me touch your computer because you know there's a prank coming down the line. It's a bit like the My Little Pony wallpapers or the, yeah, that's IT at its best. I think the one that was going around a couple of years ago, ours was the fireman wallpaper. You knew life was bad at that. Oh, yeah, I need to go to the portal. I think I need to start the server. Hang on one sec. So do you prefer Twitch chat or YouTube chat? I'm actually streaming with Restream, and so Restream is actually simulcasting both chats.
Well,
But it's currently broken at the moment, so I'll have to have a YouTube chat open up on. Well, that was a random one. It has to open up a. I have to open up a separate YouTube browser window to keep track of them. So yeah, fun times. So I'm just going to quickly jump in my tenant and turn on my SQL server because I think I've actually have it. SQL databases. Notebot database. No, me, it's going to be like, I actually do have it turned on, but I think I actually do have it turned on. I just think I thought I fixed this. Go to my happy place. Go to my happy place. Yeah, Rick rolled. Love it, Anthony. Love it. I think there was actually good story. So one of the places I worked at previously, in Confluence, I like the last week I actually jumped on there and jumped on their template and I just wrote a whole bunch of JavaScript that would Rickroll, like start up YouTube Rickroll, full screen it, like it took over, like it basically just overwrote the existing CSS, full screened Rick Astley on the screen, and then I realized it actually was a little bit too aggressive, and it actually, once it was full screened, you couldn't do anything. You actually had to open up editing tools, like the browser editing tools, and remove the div responsible. But anyway,
I found another great website like that. If anyone remembers LeetSpeak, the website which is now down was 1337.com, and it had set it up so whenever you clicked close on the tab, it would actually open up a dialog box for the lyrics of each line, and it would just be one line, and then and then you would have to click OK, and so you'd have to click through the whole lyrics of the song, and if you clicked one time more than necessary, you'd have to do it all again.
I,
It was brutal.
I think the database is up. Like, oh, unless I. This is the peer. I've got my peer. I've got a. It actually reminded me. I've got my shirt. One of my first my Briz Pug shirt, and on the back, it's basically like a cut down version of PS, which basically creates a class called meh with a start process to rickroll, and then basically registers an alias on new object to be meh. So then basically to execute it, you just go meh space meh. Oh, yeah, that's my life. Um, Download string everything. All right, I can't. I'm not gonna. I don't want to. I don't want to spend all day trying to find that. So what I'm gonna do is we're just gonna leave it for the time being. But what we can do is just return the entire row within the table
Yep.
structure. Actually, you just remind me. I know where the table structure is. It's in the original insert into. So if we do an insert into get rid of that. Oh no, don't get rid of that. I literally confuse myself and then I get, yeah. So we've got import CLI XML. So import CLI XML is the CLI XML that we're importing into
Yep.
the so that's actually the PowerShell code. Computer name target, the GUID, the status. They're really our four that we're looking for.
Okay.
So what we can do is copy that. I'm just going to paste that up in here because then we can use that as our scratch pad. Okay, so next thing we need to do now is start to think about yeah, nice, yeah. That reminded me of the Hangover when Mike Tyson's like, nice, nice. Uh, so obviously we got our if let's say the GUID exists,
Yep.
obviously we're going to be filtering on the status. So I'm just going to put this on here. We're assuming, by the way, that I haven't screwed up the input, the insert into, and that these values actually exist. I'm not going to be troubleshooting. No, I am going to cater for it because yeah. So you're going to wonder what you're going to understand why that else statement's there. But so I'm going to get you to write the next lines. So what we're going to do here is we're filtering now on the status.
Yep.
So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be looking at we've got our CLI XML, our computer name target, GUID status, and now we're looking at our statuses. So what are the two statuses that we're looking for?
From the three I wrote originally, you had failed and progress completed. So you'd be looking at or looking for an in progress.
Yep.
And a completed.
Yep. Okay, so I want you to kind of think about why, and you guys can also comment on this at home. All the viewers can comment on this as well. Why I actually added an else with a why am I here? Because that's actually really important to understand that specific condition. So we've got the condition that it's in progress. We've got the condition that it's completed. Those should be the only two conditions. Okay. So the final one, which is an else, why did you think I put that there? What am I catching?
You're catching any other error that may have occurred. So if it came up with
what do you think?
with a fail, if it there's a database error, something like that. If you're missing an input.
Exactly right. So we're catering for this. We're catering for the fact that there is some sort of any sort of other error. It will drop into that that specific condition. So you remember how we were talking about when we were actually going through if statements and talking about conditions and how we have, let's say you have a specific if statement that has 4 conditions.
Yeah.
And well, it's actually, so let's say you remember how we had those 2 objects, and when we were basically testing whether actually was it 2 objects, it was I can't even remember now. Well, basically what we're doing is we're testing this object. Yeah, it was two objects. We're testing this object and we're testing this object. But this object could exist. This object didn't exist. This object might not have existed. This object existed. They both existed, or none of them existed. So that was our four conditions that we had to cater for. In this instance, we're catering for three because basically we're testing for, does it in progress? Is it completed? Or did something hit the fan that we're not sure of? And this is why we're here. This is actually a really good example of Adobe's unknown error. That condition should never be met, but if it does, apart from Adobe's error by saying this is an unknown error, we're actually going to provide a bit more information. And one of the really cool things with PowerShell is with Azure Functions is it's logging and analytics. If I log to the logging analytics, if I log in within the PowerShell function, basically that gets pushed to logging analytics. As a note to yourself.
The problem with the YouTube chat is it's delayed. The YouTube channel is delayed by 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So.
Sorry, Anthony. What was that in relation to, mate?
That was in relation to why is the else statement now.
Oh, yeah. It's really, yeah. It's just a catch-all. With regards to you've got obviously in what was I talking about? I'm just literally just had a massive mind blank. This happens all the time. Like I'll just lose my train of thought. So yeah, so in this instance, if it falls in that category, we can actually log, we can actually log the parameters. We can basically log the full body, everything that was passed into it, so that we can have a better understanding of why it's happened. So in terms of if we're doing some sort of response logging, I would log the SQL row. I would log the parameter, so basically the request. And that's pretty much enough for you to be able to reproduce the issue. So if you're a developer and you're like, oh man, what the hell's going on here? Straight to Insights, have a look at that thing. Okay, it's this specific issue. And you can do a lot more other things with logging and analytics. There's another product out there called Azure Azure Log Analytics, which basically is part of the automation side. I don't think it is. I think it's separate. You guys can clarify. I think all logging analytics is separate. I'm just gonna have a quick look now. That is SoundCloud.
Wrong tab.
Yeah, wrong tab. Portal. It's the only reason why I like Edge when it comes to Azure is because it just automatically signs me in, and then I don't have to go through the multi-factor life. Sorry, I'm just going to switch my tenant. Resource groups. BrizPug. Just going to quickly add a new resource. I just want to see if it's Azure Monitor. Yeah, I think you're right. So log analytics. Did that change? They're always changing. No, it's log analytics. Yeah, it's through OMS. Yeah, okay. So it's part of the Azure automation side of things, even though OMS is kind of off to the side. But there's a PowerShell function that Microsoft wrote, where you can actually send logs to the specific function.
Yeah.
It means you can actually just centralize all your logging, and that's, oh my god,
So
that is like the best thing ever.
The only question there would be how secure is it?
It's pretty secure. Like obviously, you know, it's as secure as your weakest link. Put it that way.
I was listening to the semester 2 blokes at TAFE today talking about how remote logging poses more another security threat.
Yeah, the thing is that like you have to take it with a grain of salt. So there's different types of remote logging. So you've got syslogging,
Yep.
which is the traditional type of logging. So this is all done over HTTPS. So obviously HTTPS encrypted, secured, straight from your client to your endpoint. Now you can't be 100% sure that that machine hasn't been compromised. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought it was an offering part of Azure Monitor. It's also an OMS and automation. Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, the thing is okay, Azure's always changing things, so it's like, yeah, it gets pretty confusing pretty quickly. But then it's me, so I'm like, yeah. Anyway, the thing with this is that basically, like, you can log locally, you can log remotely. Um, but the biggest thing is that even if I log locally, if the machine's compromised locally, it's compromised. There's no amount of security you can have in place to be able to protect that log file from anything. Because if, like, let's say I have DA access to that local machine, I'm going to be able to get that log file out. It doesn't matter what kind of encryption I have. Like, okay, yes, I can put probably some encryption on the log file, but at the end of the day, though, all you're doing really is slowing down the attacker. If an attacker's smart enough, you'd be able to reverse engineer the code.
Yeah.
So let's say you're doing C sharp, C sharp compiles to .NET native runtime, which is reverse engineer. You can reverse engineer that quite easily. So if you're encrypting, you're basically slowing the attacker down because it only takes me 2 seconds to open up .NET Peak and reverse engineer an entire class and then find out what's going on. And I've done that with projects where I needed to find out how it worked behind the hood. But yeah, and that's exactly right. You shouldn't be the low-hanging fruit. So this comes down to best practices, like when storing passwords. Don't put class passwords in clear text. Don't you can use, for example, there's a product out there in Azure called the Credential Manager or
Yep.
Credential Vault. And what you can do is you can actually put your passwords in there, and you can actually generate like an what we call a token key. And rather than actually having to go get the password, like rather than actually having the password, you get the token key, and it acts it on your behalf. So it's a better way of managing it. Even encrypted, yeah, 100%, 100%. Don't. I actually remember one time I did that initially. It was my very first big mistake. I actually put a key value pair of an OAuth token in a GitHub repo, and then I basically, like, even if you delete it, it's still there. So I just like, well, I didn't actually fully understand Git at that point in time, so I just deleted the entire project and recreated it because I needed that to be gone. That was the safest way. So anyway, so we've got our code here now. That's pretty much it. And what do you think the final part's going to be?
Well, it would be the return information, or
Yeah, exactly right. 100%. You're just going to return the information. Um,
I was going to say, or actually executing the code, but
you don't execute the code here. We're only like it's only serving as a platform. The code the code's only getting executed on the server side, so that's something when we jump into C sharp we can do. But from this point in time, we don't actually need to do that. So let's translate that into PowerShell. So the first thing we need to do, this is something I like to do, is I kind of start to go, I'm going to get you to fill that in, to do. To be honest, we can just carry out the SQL lookup, and then what we can say is, we can then say, so that's going to be our SQL lookup.
yep. Can you put an S in my name there? Cheers.
So the next thing we're going to do is, actually we're really good. Yep. So now, actually, to be honest, so what I'm doing here is I'm defining the status code. So remember how we're talking about the status codes?
Yep.
So what we're looking for, what are our status codes in progress? Yep.
In progress and completed.
Okay. What have I missed there? I think I've missed something. I've got a feeling. Yes.
Why am I here?
Yes, exactly right. Why am I here?
What's my purpose in life?
Yeah. So now, um, let's start. So you're driving.
Wonderful.
Let's go.
Okay.
So we're testing the object property. So that's our first thing we're going to do.
Well, that's all this down here, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So you
Sad
remember
for
how we're going to do that?
Let me have a quick look at the other stuff.
Just so you know, I have really bad English, so like feel free to pay out. That's fine.
What one was?
Do you want to see an example? Do you?
I was just gonna.
Oh
look
yeah,
at-
that's fine. Yeah, go for it. Just make sure you don't Just make sure you just yeah, you don't delete it. Actually, I don't really care if you delete anything.
Yeah,
We're not
it'll
committing.
take you 2 seconds to fix. It'd take me 3 years, and even then, I'd probably get it wrong.
That was like the other day. Actually, I'm going to throw this out to you guys because this is something I had using statements within PS Jobs. So I had I was running an integration test for one of my modules at work, and what I had was I was using a using statement, and I had a let's say I was passing multiple variables into my job. So let's say I had a variable that I wasn't actually using the args property. Sorry, the arguments. Was it the within PS Jobs? I can't remember what the arguments to pass property. I was just using the using statement within the actual script block of the job. So let's say I'm calling 3 variables within the job. I have let's say count, script path, and yeah, full name. Count works, script path didn't, and full name didn't. So what was happening was, if I entered the debug session, it just didn't. It couldn't actually source the the other 2 variables. It was fine with the count, so I thought it was to do with scoping issues within variables. So because I was inside of a script. Well, this is the thing. I didn't like with a using statement. You shouldn't need to use the args. That's the thing. So, no, and like, sorry, I wasn't using args at all. I was just basically using a using. So, when you go, you just go dollar using colon, and then you can actually reference the variable names outside of the script block of the job. It would reference the first one, but the other 2 just wouldn't work. So, I don't is it with PowerShell, is it that you can only pass 1 through, or is it you can actually pass as many as you want? Because that was the thing that I kind of like to get it to work. I actually didn't even use args. I just used the param block on the start of the script block, and then basically use the arguments parameter on the PS job. But it was, for me, it was actually it was quite frustrating because I spent an hour and a half and I couldn't troubleshoot it. Like, it wasn't to do with scope, because what I did was I actually defined it explicitly in the script block itself that it was being, in the parent script block that it was being executed in. So it was within the correct variable scope, but it just wasn't referencing it. So I think I'm going to have a bit of a play with it later, but the only way I could get it to work was to use the parameters. So I don't know if I was doing something wrong or if you guys can give me some tidbits, but I couldn't understand why. You only need to know about the parameters. How do you scope it in the parent script? So when you so if you're using a using statement, you only need, if you go test object property. Oh, hang on, Control Z. You only need to specify the object, and then you need to specify the property. So if you scroll up. So keep going up. Where's our code?
Here.
Okay, so we're going to test object property under line 12.
Yep.
Yep. So now we're just going to go test-object property. Yep, and then we're going to go space, hyphen, object. It doesn't exist because I haven't put it in memory. And then we go, yep, property. What do you think the object's going to be?
Object's going to be GUID. Property is going to be GUID object would be request query. Property is going to be GUID.
Now, this is actually really one of the really cool things you can do. I'm going to show you something. So the way that this works is that it has an allow null. So we can actually pass nothing into it. So even if the object is completely busted, it will still accept a null. And it just validates that within here. So if it's null within here, it just biffs it out. But it's really what it means is that, so the property is GUID, you're right. The property is going to be request.query. Oh, shoot. Does that make sense? Oh, you can finish it up. So yeah, if you use the args way, how do I scope it in the parent script? Yeah, so when if you Google using what's it called? Hang on, let me quickly just open it up on my phone. I think yeah, it's using remote variables. I'm pretty sure. There's a
Do you call the property as an object or by itself?
that's yeah, exactly right. Yeah, it's just you're just referencing the property, so
Okay.
it'll be GUID. Yep. So what do you? Okay, so that's and remember what do you think that's going to be? Is that going to be like? I want you to think about that. So we've performed the action, but we want it to be a condition. So what are we going to put it inside of? Yeah, if you have a look at about remote variables, that's going to talk about what I'm talking about. So within that, you can use the if you go down to using remote variables in PowerShell 5, where is it? It's actually using local variables. You can use local variables and remote commands, but you must indicate that the variable is defined in the local session. Beginning in PowerShell 3, you can use this using scope modifier to identify the local variable in the remote command. The following example, PS variable is created in a local session, but it's in the session it'll be in the session that the command runs. Using the scope modifier identifies PS as a local variable, so you can call outside it, but it only works for one variable, and then everything else doesn't work. So I might be doing something wrong. So
That like that, or I'm doing it wrong?
it's a condition, so it's got to be we're thinking. Oh no, you don't even need to worry about that because it's going to pass it as a string.
Right.
So what I mean by that is this is going to now return true or false, but we need to do an action on it.
So we need to put it in that.
We're going to make an if statement. Remember how we make an if statement? Remember how we do ifs? So if we go back to, you can have a look at my code. So jump onto the other tab. There's one right there. 63.
Yeah.
Yep.
So just directly below it, we throw an if.
We're going to actually encase the condition inside the if. Yep. So I have no idea you're the teacher here, and Mr. Teacher Aid.
Yeah, no, it's
Okay.
that's what they call me at TAFE because some of the people they need some assistance, and one of the teachers turned around and said, "I don't know, just ask Christian."
Yeah, exactly. So if you condition do stuff. So
right. So it's not that, it's that.
Yep.
Thank you, Adelia. I would have been lost without you.
Yep. So what are we going to do inside of that? What do you think?
Inside of it.
Yep,
So
we're going to do something with it because remember.
Yeah.
Yep. And this is another thing I want to talk about is that we want it to be. We're testing on the basis that it's going to fail. We're not going to test on the basis that it's going to succeed. So what do you think we're going to need to do to that if statement to make it so that it doesn't evaluate to be true, but it does evaluate to be false? Very close. You need to get rid of this. You need to wrap it inside a parenthesis. So we can say that yes. So I want you to explain to me now what that's doing, that if statement.
Okay, so if the test property object, test subject property with the object request query and the property GUID do not evaluate to be true.
Yep. So what does that mean?
Um,
What does that mean in layman's terms?
in layman's terms, what you're asking is if it doesn't exist, if it doesn't return what you're looking for.
Yep. And what are we going to do there?
Where we want that to return the error, the no GUID.
Yep.
Well,
It's going to just be at 400. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what we can do there is I'm going to take over for a sec because this is just you won't fully understand what's going on, and I'm not going to try and explain it. So what I'm doing here, this is just comes down to how we're architecting the function. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically defining the body
yep.
of the response within here, but you can see that it's going to basically sorry, I'm kind of humming and hawing now. Can you paste? Cool. Can you press Shift Tab? Press hold Shift. Yep. Tab. Press Tab. Shift Tab again. Perfect. Can you put a comment in there saying return an error? Cool. Perfect. So we're just basically defining the status as a HTTP bad request and response code. Yep, I'm going to do it this way. So this is how we return back. We're going to use push output binding, name response value blah. So what we're going to do here is go Control P. Oh, Control, yeah, that does. Sorry, Control P. I don't know what I'm smoking.
Control P goes print.
Yeah, Control P prints. Next thing you know, printer's firing up. So from that now, we're just going to push that out. I'm going to clean this up a bit because I'm not too happy with the architecture of the script. But what we've got here now is I'm just going to clean this up to make it a little bit more readable. So as you can see, there's status code, there's the body, and I'm going to now exit the script because we're actually in the main script. The easiest way to do that, OCD is getting triggered. Oh yeah, 100%. I literally spend ages just like tinkering around with scripts. I'm like, nah, I don't like this. I like if there's more than like 3-4 statements in a script, I get annoyed and I'm thinking, how do I like make this better? Because that's just me. Like I am like so I like having scripts that are so neat and easy to read that it just makes like I don't know. That's just me. Like I just like to have that's how I write my code. I'm very OCD about it. So what I'm going to do because we're in the parent script, we're actually going to return back to the caller, which is the initialization of the function. It's actually the function. So we're just going to use a return. And so when you're inside, I don't even need that. So when you're inside of, yeah, perfect's the enemy of good. I suffer too. But the thing is it's like nothing, like for me, nothing, like having a well-written script just makes me like, I don't know, it's like a fine wine. It just feels so good to be, like when you're reading it, it just flows off, like it feels easy to read, it's understand, you get a good understanding of what the logic flow is and how everything's hanging together. You're not kind of, humming and hawing. But the hardest thing about it is that, like for me, is actually reading code that I'm not going to say badly written, but terribly written is the better term. And there's code out there that personally, like, it triggers me hardcore. There was one time I delivered a piece of I was looking at a piece of code, and I got so triggered, and I was so annoyed that I actually like, it's one of the few times, like, I actually said to one of my team leaders, I just said, we like I I honestly think this code is substandard, and, like, apart from some other choice words, um mainly starting with S. Yeah, it just, yeah, and 100% it's copy. I wouldn't say even copy paste driven development. It's even more along the lines of, like, don't get me wrong, copy paste driven development. Yeah, I actually had a person talk to me about that, and he said, we're gonna automation guys like me are gonna get kicked. Are gonna get priced, well, not priced out, but you get
Become obsolete
become
because
obsolete because of copy paste development. And I'm like, what's rule number one with me is you don't run code you don't understand, because if you run code that you don't understand, basically what's going to happen is you are going to introduce a bug that you don't understand. And when you introduce that bug that you don't understand, then you're going to try and debug that when you don't understand. Then you're going to basically be in, pretty much up shit creek, excuse the language, without a paddle. So that's why it's really important for, yeah, never do that. Or at least if you are, make sure you understand what you're doing. But the thing with like there's but the thing is, for me, is it's like writing code is like trying to um yeah, 100%, 100%. I've seen it both ways. 100% dev guys don't think they don't need ops, and it's the other way around. It even comes down to commenting and just basic, like, syntax arrangement and how you actually tab it out. Now, people have different writing styles. Okay, that's the same reason why I built 100%. You should build a DSC configuration, and then you just basically rebuild your PC, and then you just load your DSC on, and then let it provision and install Steam and install that. That'll be one
we
hell.
we haven't done DSC yet,
Yeah,
Michael.
that's this month's pub. This month's meetup. Actually, it's payday today too. I get to actually buy the DSC book. Um, exactly right. Comments are the most important thing. There was this um there was this piece of code I had to write, and it's actually going to become a scripting games um one. It's going to become a scripting games challenge, and it's one of the most hardest pieces of logic I've ever had to write and I'll comprehend. And the and I actually, like, after you spend a bit of time away from code, you actually lose the understanding of the logic. That just disappears from your mind. You've got other things to worry about. But then you have to revisit that code, and you actually have to look at why that's happening the way it's doing. And this was a specific class I wrote, and I actually wrote I just wrote literally paragraphs of comments with examples on why I was doing what I was doing. So when I actually had to reread it, I just reread my code and gone, okay, perfect. And then when I actually had to start troubleshooting it, it literally took me 2 minutes to troubleshoot. And there's just that, yeah, comments, those kinds of pieces of documentation is just really important to be able to, assist yourself and other developers. Like, if you you know if you're just writing on the fly and you're writing for yourself, you're basically doing something where, you're going to be able to understand it right then and there, but future you is just going to hate you, and also everyone else.
Oh yeah.
If you like it's when you write advanced functions, and I'm talking along the lines of, like, when we're actually writing proper PowerShell functions where we're going to be using inside of a module. And we're going to do this with our ones when we actually package up a little mini module. We're going to be writing advanced functions, which means we're going to be using what if statements. We're going to be using write verbose. All those best practices kind of go into that. Yeah, I actually started writing integration tests for my module with Pessa a couple of days ago.
It was the last BrizPug meeting too,
Yeah,
testing with Pesta.
yeah, so good. Like, Pesta testing, I have to admit, like, it takes ages to write, but then when you actually go to deploy, it takes 2 seconds to validate your code. So I had to validate two types of authentication methods, and I had to test specific key characteristics. So I had to have 10 simultaneous sessions of PowerShell running, referencing an OAuth endpoint, and I had to have on one of those pesta tests basically I have a method within the module to be able to actually force a token refresh on that specific one for each command that it looks up, which is fine for itself because what it will do is it'll actually refresh the token and update the configuration. That's what we're testing for that specific one. But the other 9 need to be able to handle that specific thing. So the moment that token expires, their queries, like their lookups, are going to fail. And so what it needs to do is basically go, hey, I firstly want to try and do a refresh. Can I actually refresh the token? Does that work? No, it doesn't work. Okay, someone else is trying to do a refresh. Maybe I'm going to wait a little bit and check the configuration file. So it's able to, I need to test the configuration file to make sure it doesn't corrupt itself with a bad token refresh. I needed to check all these different things. And doing that, writing that test took me about half a day to write. But then coming back to actually performing the test, it takes me 30 seconds to test. And now that 30 seconds, basically, when I go to do any sort of deploy in the future, I have complete confidence that I haven't mucked something up in the configuration, because that was one of the hardest things I had to do with pester testing, was to actually write a test.
Yeah, you had to reverse engineer your tests for the code you'd already written.
Yeah. So I actually had to write a test that basically had to test 7 on multiple sessions simultaneously. Well, in 7, and I think it was in 20 different jobs, simultaneously running the same test, with one of them forcing a token refresh randomly, and then basically grabbing those tests and then basically capturing the output and then looking through the results and looking for failures. And that was, like, to be honest, like, now I've wrote it, I'm just like, I just love Pester so much. It's one of my most favorite. Like, it just makes things so much easier to test. Like, to your original point, one of the beauties of PowerShell as a language, it was made for others to collaborate and to understand. Yes, it is. But it's if people choose to collaborate. That's the key. All right, anyway, back to some PowerShell. So what we're going to do here is we're going to write an error. We're actually going to write an error. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to update this variable. Like so. Got a HTTP bad request. I'm going to write an error. I'm just going to do this. Don't really need stack trace because we know that the GUID doesn't exist. I might actually the grid prop the GUID. So what I'm doing now, I'm just trying to make it a little bit more descriptive so that we understand what we're doing. So I got a bad request. So and to basically return it, we're going to do that. So the next thing we're going to need to do is we got our query. So we've got our request query. Now we're going to create an SQL lookup. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to write the SQL query because you don't understand SQL. So first things first, I'm not going to just write it straight out. I'm going to literally copy and paste it from my other function because I need to know.
I have to admit, I wish this is the kind of stuff they also tried to teach us.
You will get, like, this is the thing, like, you will learn SQL. SQL is something that everyone kind of, like, no one wants to know, but you need to know. I didn't really want to know SQL, but to be honest, having SQL is one of the more handy products out there. So in this instance, we've got, so in that previous one, we're doing what we call insert into. We're just going to do a select. Yeah, when you start doing joins, that's when things start getting really, really messy. My favorite ones I remember doing was I had to write a common table expression, which was like a recursive lookup. Oh man, that literally, like SQL, it's funny though, because this logic flow to SQL is completely different to PowerShell. So you have to kind of stop, take a step back, put your SQL shoes on, and get into the logic of SQL because it's a completely different way of processing. So it's not like PowerShell where you're like do this, do this, do this. It's significantly different. No variable, everything is nested. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're basically going to do a select, and we're going to basically, Oops, that's fine. So what we're gonna do, I'm just gonna put. So you remember what I'm doing here? Well, I've got SQL params and I've got command text and I've got my key values in there. Do you remember why we
Yeah.
did that? Can you explain why while I got this?
Remembering why we did that?
Yep.
Not so much, but um, let's no, I can't remember why we did that.
Remember splatting?
Yes.
So rather than actually having a single line, because you can see this is quite a complex commandlet that, well, this is quite a lengthy bunch of parameters that we're actually putting into a commandlet. For me, readability makes it easier to actually splat it in where I can actually read out the values.
Yep.
So in this instance here, it's just, yeah, so I'm writing my query statement and then within that, I'm actually just formatting the items within that. Can you explain to me what I'm doing there?
You're assigning the values 0, 1, 2, and 3 to the input class XML computer name, target, GUID, and status.
Okay. Pretty straightforward, yeah.
And interestingly enough, the amount of people I've had to explain to at TAFE that when you're working with computers, you start the count at 0. 0 is essentially 1. That they still don't get it.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing is everything's zero based. Some things might be, might not be, but traditionally speaking, you always like it's easier to start at a zero base and then move to one, like,
Yeah.
and then think, oh, okay, and then some might not, like, but that's fine, like you just cater for it. But if you don't know that, then yeah, you're gonna struggle, which is pretty much, yeah, that's fun. All right, so we've got command text, status where, so we're just selecting our row responses where, so I'm saying here, select these columns. Try to tell her. I'll do that, and I'll let you guys know. One of no, I'm not gonna say that. I actually had a yeah, I had a really funny prank. Um, I did with my wife, and yeah, actually, no, I'm gonna do it. So one of my really funny pranks I did with my wife on our anniversary is I actually sat down and I tried to have a performance review with her, and that did not go down well. I feel like I would have been the one who's like needing the, needing the additional training, but like mainly empathy training. But yeah, it was still pretty funny. I'm that kind of bloke. Okay. So, so what we've got here is we're testing for property GUID. We can actually just do this. So you see what I've done there? I'm just going to get the GUID.
Yep.
So once we've done that, now we actually can just, obviously we know our variable is GUID, which is going to just pass through, so that's fine. We can get rid of this one. And me being me. No, don't like that.
No, it was easier to read before.
Yeah, I'm like, so select climax, blah. Now I can do it, I can take a shortcut, but I feel like you guys who are watching the stream will probably murder me. The biggest no-no you can do in a select query is a select star, which basically just means it's a wildcard for everything. So you're supposed to, as best practice, specify exactly what you want to get. So what I'm doing is I'm getting the CliXML, the computer name target, the GUID, and the status.
Yep.
Where the GUID,
It's item 0.
which is item 0, which is the GUID that we've passed through. So
the F to use the CMD thing, the argument there, is that meaning force? Format operator.
It's just the format operator.
Right.
Yeah. So what we can do now is I'm just gonna, I know I'm using my function, so I've got an invoke SQL function that I wrote because I'm super lazy to actually get a module, and personally I think it's just easier. Yeah, exactly. Format operator makes everything neat. Nothing drives me more like bonkers when I see, like end of string, concatenate, variable, concatenate, open string. I'm like, that is such VB scripting days. It's just, yeah, that and splatting. Yep, makes things so much neater. So we've obviously got our invoke SQL queries request. So one of the things I do need to put in here is this. What this basically is a parameter I have. I'm just going to grab that function, and I'll quickly take you through the function. I just wrote this in my spare time because, yes, again, I'm sick and tired of having to. Where did we put the other one? Oh, there it is. We're going to need to clean this code up. Christian, you can clean the code up. So, yeah, yep. If you write neat code to begin with, you're alright. So basically, this is a function I wrote. It's kind of more a little bit like a commandlet, somewhat bit in between actually. It doesn't have all the funky stuff. So you can basically, for example, select star from table, pipe it into invoke SQL, specify your items, and then you can specify this invoke read parameter. What that basically does from a SQL perspective, it says, hey, I want to actually read some data. We actually do want to read data. Now, traditionally, in this instance, we're just kind of, as you can see here, we've got, so has the read parameter been specified? If it's invoke read, we're just going to build that. So we're creating an execute reader, and we're going to load the data table. This will throw terminating errors on any issues it has, as you can see denoted by the throw.
Yep.
So we need to encapsulate this inside a try catch. So now I'm completely lost in which one is that's HTTP staff job. It's HTTP staff. Cool. So what we can do is, so we've got invoke read as true. Obviously I'll fix them up later, and now we can actually invoke our requests. So what we need to do here, I'm going to denote that. I'm going to put that in as a variable, and we've actually got our content. Now let's get rid of this. We're going to clean this up too. What this basically means is when you see write error, writing a non-terminating error. But what I'm doing is, when you see, remember when you see $_, that's the current object within the pipeline. So in this instance, it'll be within catch. So that's going to print the actual error variable itself. So we can just write error. Here's your variable, which means that'll get caught by login and analytics, and we know that there's a SQL error that's being logged. Perfect. So what we need to do now is we actually need to look at that data set. So one of the things I love about PowerShell is its ability to format everything as a PS object, or the ability to actually look inside an object. So when we actually look at the object type back, each of the properties, it will return, if you're obviously returning more than one row back, it will return, let's say you had if first name is Michael and we had 20 Michaels in there, it will return 20 Michaels. It will return a collection, which means we can actually iterate through those collections and have a look at it. But we know in this instance it's just going to be one value. Admittedly, I'm going to take a shortcut here. We should test on the response, but I'm going to be too lazy. And what I mean by that is, so when we did our SQL response, we should actually validate that there's only one response. So what happens if there's two responses? That's actually something we didn't cater for. So if there's two responses, we've got two GUIDs, we've got a problem because we don't know which one's what. So in this instance, what we're going to do there, Mark, great rant about it at Summit. Oh man, nothing makes me happier when you see someone have a rant about it at a talk. That you know it's like there's like some serious frustration, and it's just like been simmering away. Anyway, so in this instance we've got our SQL response. So we're going to test the response. Actually, and this is going to work out really well because we can actually validate using this. We can validate, was there even a response? So you know how we were talking about up here, where we had our piece of code, if no GUID is 404?
Yep.
So we're going to do that. Actually, IWR, IRM? Sorry,
Invoke web request,
Oh,
invoke REST method.
okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah, I'm like, huh? Yeah. Log tape is one big far. It really is. Every time he talks to me about tape, I'm just like, oh my god. Like it only gets really interesting in the second half. Like that's what I found. Like that's when I really
Well,
like.
yeah, semester 2, we're meant to be doing more virtualization,
Yeah.
security,
Yeah.
bit of network architecture, so I'm looking forward to that.
Exactly. Yeah. That's like first one's just kind of building those foundations, and then yeah. But at the end of the day, you just gotta suck it up and go through with it, like, and then basically like the stuff off the side's pretty much going to give you a massive leg up in terms of what you're actually learning. So anyway, we're gonna need to finish this up soon, but what I'm going to do is we're going to get this statement finished first, and then we'll kind of talk about what we did, and then we'll
Yep.
finish it. So we've got test how many results there are. That's how we're going to validate. So what happens in this query is if there's no result, so if the GUID doesn't exist, it will return nothing. We can actually validate that. So what we can do here is we can go, I'm just going to keep that commented out because I actually need to make some changes. The property count will exist. So even though we've invoked the read method, it will return an object.
Yep.
It'll just be nothing in it. It'll be null. Actually, sorry, it'll return a collection that will be null, which means the count property, a count property will always be attached to a collection, which means we can use that count property to validate is there any results. So what we can say here is if the count's equal to 0, nothing's come back. We don't even need to worry about it. So so what we can do here is then once we've done that, we can then go, okay, what's our next condition? Because basically we know that we've got a no result. What do you reckon the other two conditions
Multiple
are?
results.
Okay,
and a result of 1.
So actually, and you can write it. So I want you to write that. So the thing is though, Christian, is that like at the end of the day though, like you might not fully understand exactly everything. Like you understand the concept, but the more you do it, eventually something will click on. It's like riding a bike.
Wouldn't it be easier in this instance to say if SQL response count not equal to 1?
Well, that's the thing. This is something that I actually thought about, and you're completely right. The only reason why I want to go the other way is because I want to log if there hasn't been a result. But if has been multiple results, we need to know that there's been multiple results. So that means that basically falls into a 3 condition statement rather than a 1.
Yeah.
Because basically your 3 conditions are, is there nothing? Okay, log there's no result and return to the user. If there is a 1 result, fantastic. Let's start looking at it. If there's 2 results, that's serious critical issue. We need to basically log that specific issue. So it means that from a logging perspective and a troubleshooting perspective, it's easier to troubleshoot. So if you kind of go the other way, you're kind of a little bit in the dark in terms of there's another condition that can potentially be met there that you kind of have to reproduce. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the only reason why I would kind of think the same way, but in this instance it's kind of better to go the other way because that third condition is quite possible. And if it's possible, it means that hypothetically, well, let's say it should never happen, but if it does happen, we need to know about it.
Yeah. So in this instance, would you put both errors first and then the one you're looking for in the code, or would you go the 0, the equal to 1, and then greater than 1?
I would go 0, greater than 1, and then 1. The only reason why is because basically we're going to inherently, in this instance, the previous statements we've inherently made PowerShell return bad. So we're looking for errors. You actually the final statement will be 1. So you can technically just go else. You don't even need to do an else if, because we know that there's only 3 conditions that can come back. So what you can do there to make it, you can just go else and then open curly braces. Yeah. So what you can do there to clarify to the person is you can say, can spell equal. See what I'm doing? So I'm actually documenting the exact changes so we can go there. Let's leave it there, but let's quickly go through what we've done. It's a bit of a mess. You can clean it up. You can just use this as an example.
Yeah.
And like obviously you've got access to the GitHub repo, so you can just go ahead and do that. I don't really care. So what we've done is we've basically obviously just taken a copy of the other function and we're now adjusting to what we want to do. So we've got our initial request. So we're basically, remember, we're using the URL request query. So we're basically testing if the property exists. Does it exist? Does it not exist? That's the first thing we need to understand, because if we don't, if it doesn't exist, well, we're testing. We could potentially be testing with bad data. I don't want to take that risk, and I don't think anyone else wants to either. It also gets you in the habit of being able to understand that it's always good to test your code in terms of test your objects, test the values before actually accepting them. This comes down to like my biggest pet peeve is a string can be null, it can be empty. So you need to test for those values. So rather than like if you say okay it's equal to what we call double quote string, that is usually indicative of empty. We go okay that's bad. But the thing is the string could also be null, but nobody really tests for that. So you kind of need to like. It's always good to think about how you can test for those issues because they will come back and bite you. There was a time recently where I had a function that I had with my colleague Alex, which basically compares two object properties. So you can basically have an object with tons and tons of properties, and what it will do is it'll do basically a side-by-side comparison and look at two, and it'll show you the difference values and your reference values and basically say, is it the same or is it changed? Has a whole bunch of other interesting things. But one of the biggest things with SQL queries is that basically the value can come through as an empty string or it can come through as null. And the way that I actually had to add a special switch in there. So technically they're different. They're apples and oranges. They're two different types. But in this instance, technically they're the same. So I had to add a switch in there saying allow null and empty, null and empty as same. And what I did there was I actually had to write additional code to be able to cater, okay, if it's null and empty, then make them the same, like treat them as the same.
Yep.
So this is really where that kind of testing is what kind of, because I didn't test for it, that bit us in the bum. And it's always really good to kind of understand that sometimes it's, you really need to kind of test the values and the properties that you're actually using. You don't go overboard and test for things like dot count, because if you know it's a collection and it's coming, for example, from Dart like SQL, that's going to exist. Like it's if it doesn't exist, then there's a problem with .NET. But if it's something else like that you're unsure of, for example, a URL query request, that's a mandatory. We always should test that. Anyway, so we've obviously got our GUID, and now basically we've invoked our select query, appending the GUID onto the very end. I'm going to clean this up later. I'm probably going to clean this. I'm going to actually build this all in another stream, probably maybe Friday. I might do that. And then following that, then basically I'm invoking my SQL query, and then basically doing try catches for the response and looking at like I should try catch it. I'm invoking my query inside a try catch because it's terminating errors. And then basically from the response, I'm looking at how many items are coming back. So we're going to leave it there for today, guys. If you have any questions or anything, you can just fire them through. We're going to stick around for a little bit longer. Mainly it's just going to be just a chat now. But yeah, if you've got questions, throw them through. And I can do my best to try and answer them. Also, yeah, I'm probably going to try and stream on Friday, which is probably going to be about the same time. Which is obviously different for different parts around the world, but it really depends on how I'm going, if I've got any chores I need to do with Bob. So it definitely Bob takes priority, unfortunately, because
That's nice.
yeah, it's great though. She's such a great one. You get like go downstairs. She's like hello, and I'm like yeah. She's like ah. And she starts laughing. It's like great. But anyway.
Thanks for joining us,
Yeah,
guys.
thanks Anthony, and thanks guys. I really hope you guys liked it. Yeah, PowerShell 101, Michael and Christian Wednesday nights. It's really good for you guys to stick around. If you have questions or anything, just throw them through or send me a whisper. I'm also open to a project like VS Live hackathon projects. So if you're interested in that, let me know as well. I'm really keen on that. But anyway, guys, thanks for that. I hope you guys had fun, and I hope to see you guys next time. Anyway, see you guys.
Catch you later.